All right, we're going to get started this morning. So the last few class periods, last couple of lesson sets that we went through, we studied Daniel. We kind of went off of that to do a study of Revelation. We've wrapped that up a few weeks back. And we've been kind of kicking the can down the road just a little bit with sporadic times of having class with the holidays and everything. But we are ready to get back into another set of lessons. And so we're going to look into the parables of Jesus. And there's a few very well-known ones, but there's just a lot of them. And so there's a lot to get to. And we're not going to do one each time. We'll do several each time. But I want to kind of try to group them up as best I can together in a way that will hopefully be... I wouldn't say new, because I think that a lot of them are familiar, but hopefully just encouraging kind of look at these as we look at the teachings of Jesus. And one of the things you've probably heard, when you look at it, you probably focus Matthew 13. I mean, that is the chapter that would have, almost... I say it's a rapid fire parable. It's like this, it's just one right after another. It's just parable after parable after parable. And almost like he's rattling them off at that time to really teach a lot. But there are some that are very obvious when you hear a parable that, he spoke to them in parables, and then he tells them like this story that has another meaning to it. There's others that aren't really styled that way, but they're still parables in the sense that there's kind of this dual meaning to it, both physical as well as that. We've probably heard that phrase, it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. That's the way I think probably the majority of us were taught of what a parable is, and that's still true. It's what it is. It's this idea that he tells a story because we can relate in the earthly sense. We can relate in the physical sense. And so if we hear a story, then we can kind of relate to it because it's something that is in a tangible sense of something that we can picture in our mind, that we can understand how all of it would be expected to go. And when it goes a little different than that, or when there's like a little twist to it, then we would understand how he's trying to explain to us the differences there when we get into our understanding of heavenly things. He goes on. Again, not all parables are going to be stories, though. So there are those that are truly stories. There are others which are almost just direct statements where he's going to say that the kingdom of heaven is like this, almost that metaphors or similes in that sense. And so, but they're going to have a dual meaning the same way. And so we'll look at a few of those because I think when you look at those together, it gives sometimes you can see where he's saying the exact same message to two different groups in two different ways. All right, so we're going to look at Matthew chapter 5 for the first one. So Josh has the first verse he's going to read for us. This one, Matthew 5, verse 13. So if you're ready, Josh, go ahead.
You are the light. You are the salt and the earth. But the song, who is talking at? How it could be, but it's not again. It's not good for anything. There's nothing to be from at a drop of our neck. That's back to you.
All right, thank you, Josh. All right, so this idea that you are the salt of the earth. And so he's using this, in this sense, kind of a metaphorical one on this one. Are we actually salt? No. And so he doesn't say that you're actually a pillar of salt. That this is, people are going to take you and shake you over their French fries. It's not this idea that, it's this idea that we have this quality about us. And so he wants us to see that the same way that if salt, and think about what if salt couldn't make anything salty, what is its purpose? If salt couldn't melt the snow, we'd stop putting it on the sidewalks. If salt couldn't season your food, we'd stop using that for flavoring. If salt couldn't preserve food and keep it longer, we'd stop using it for that. If salt loses its characteristics, its saltiness, then it's good for nothing. And so that's what he wants to explain them is he has a purpose for us. We are to season and preserve the earth in that sense of carrying on this message that we are the ones who are going to be that one that changes the world in the sense of flavors it in a different way. You take something, I've always grown up, my grandma made the best chicken and dumplings, and if you think yours did, you're wrong. It was mine. And actually, it's my great-grandmother's recipe. And when I was younger, she was still alive, and we had, we found the other day, somebody has held on to it, and I still have the handwritten recipe of hers, and it's so simple, but it's so good. But I will say this. not enough salt, chicken and dumplings are not good. I'll just say, like, that is the one thing I don't love. I'm not the biggest, salt intake or anything like that. But when it comes to chicken and dumplings, they better be salty. There's just certain things, and peppery too. But on that one, totally side point. The idea there is if you were to keep sprinkling salt on it and they never got any better off, it's lost its purpose. It's lost its there. So it's good for nothing except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And again, you can see, how does this then relate to us? How does this relate to us? You look at all of these and think, what message is he trying to get across to us? If we can't go about doing and accomplishing what it was that he would have us to do, that he has purposed us to do, then are we really good for anything? Now that's a harder little pill to swallow there at the end, right? Because then it starts getting personal. It's like, well, I'm not good for nothing. But if you're not accomplishing what he wants you to do, are we really serving any purpose at that point? And it's really just a way to look at it introspectively. These are words of Jesus. These are red letters in our Bible. These are words that he wants us to get this understanding of it. He goes on to say, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So again, now we see that not only are we salt, but we're also light. And this idea that salt has a purpose to accomplish something, light has this undeniable quality of changing things around it. When you turn on a light, everything in the room changes. There's no way it can't, because that's what light does. It illuminates. It changes the coloring of things. It provides all of that. And so with all of that, if you put it, you don't light it and then hide it. And so if you are light and you are the light of the world, hiding away your light and completely covering it up is just as ludicrous as lighting a lamp and then covering it up with a bowl so that none of the light gets out. You can imagine, how much we probably all had the parent, whether it was the mom or dad, depends on the situation, who walked around behind you and flipped off the lights. Saving money all the time, saving that. Or you may be the one. Maybe you're the one on that one. And that's fine, because it doesn't make any sense. It's like leaving the light on in a closet. What's the point in that? When you close the closet door, why is there a light on in there? It makes no sense. Who's utilizing the light? It's that kind of concept of that, why would you have this light and not shine it to the world? If you are the light of the world, if we are the one that has the only true tapping into the source of light, and we don't share that, we're like the salt that doesn't have saltiness, the light that doesn't actually share its light. There's all of this pointlessness to what our lives would become at that point. And yeah, it's not comfortable to think about that way, but Jesus really didn't come to make us necessarily feel comfortable in where we were, but instead to help us get to where we needed to be on there. So again, our lives are to remain dedicated to Christ. And so that's how we're going to have this impact on the world around us. I think that's what we kind of see out of these. So to be impactful, we need to be seen as we are, full of light. We need to be salty, not that way. Be careful. Be careful, because we have another definition of that word too. But, we want to be salt, not salty, maybe. That's what we just need to be salt. So you kind of see this. All right, so over the last, when we were looking at Revelation, we were going through that really kind of rapid pace. And a few times and I knew it wouldn't work, I attempted to get some conversation going, but that is the one book that's never going to lend itself to like a whole lot of full-blown conversation on there. And I knew that one in there. So we're going to, hopefully, as we go through there, I have a lot of questions in these that I think will hopefully kind of help us to, I can come up with some thoughts on these, but I think collectively we can probably come up with even more. And so we're going to look at some of these. We'll do that one after this one. So be thinking about how when you read these, kind of what your takeaway is, because these have a meaning to them that the listener was to get out of it. And so when we read a parable, everyone's going to take, I'm going to say differently, but it may have a little different take on it, or an added kind of thought that would be beneficial to all of us. All right, so he said to them, "Do you bring in a lamp and put it under a bowl or a bed? Instead, don't you put it on its stand? For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, And whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out in the open. If anyone has ears to hear, let them hear. Now, this is a little different, right? I think we can see there's a not so subtle difference between you're the light of the world and let your light shine. Don't hide it under a bowl in that sense. On this one, it says you don't do that. You don't light a lamp and put it under a bowl or underneath the bed so that it has no light being given to it. But what does he say right after that? For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out in the open. All right, so with this, he goes on and says, consider carefully what you hear. He continued, with the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and even more. Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. All right, so this lamp on a stand. How does this differ from the first one? In what ways, does this parable differ from the first mention of a lamp? The light of the world, now this truly just really referencing us as a lamp on a stand. What's the main difference? What's your thought?
Well, on the Mark passage about the light, comment about meant to be disclosed, or it's not necessarily. And yet, so you're going in a little depth of understanding about the purpose of the light is one area that comes to mind. But as opposed to, are you talking about the difference between the salt and the light?
Well, not between the salt and light, particularly between the difference between like this concept of us being light. We see one of them that we are the light of the world, and we don't want it to be under a bowl for that reason. This one, we're like a lamp on a stand in this situation. Or it doesn't say we are. He just says you don't take this lamp and put it on a stand. So I guess part of it is it's separated away that one of them is more about us directly and how we live our lives. This one now is going to talk more about the light in the sense of light has a purpose to it, and it's to bring things to light. And so what then becomes the focus of us on this, I guess, is maybe that way. It also, a little bit of that. I think the first one's more evangelical, and the second one, this particular one, to me, and this is the way my reading of it would be maybe this one's more self-introspective, kind of where you look at yourself and you think, okay, I am going to figure out, are there things that, that need to be brought to light, or are there things that if light is shown on me and get brought to light, am I okay with that? And maybe I'm misreading that part of it, but I kind of see that things that are hidden need to be brought to the light and disclosed.
The first one in Matthew, to me, is more of the influence that you have, shining out your life as it would be. And the lamp on the stand is, like you preaching, is you telling us of what the light should be and hoping we respond to it.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. All right, there's a little follow-up question then. So what is the theme and the message of this one? Maybe the message is how do we respond to it? How do we respond to the light that is shown? On this one, if we go back, I'll kind of go back a couple of these just to refresh your memory on this one part where it says, do you bring this lamp in and put it under? No, obviously that's kind of a rhetorical no, you don't do that. Instead, you put it on its stand. So that's what we do with the light. Whatever's hidden is meant to be disclosed. And that's the part where I guess I come up with maybe more of a struggle of where he's going with on this one, exactly what he means by this one. But he says if anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. So like he wants us to get this idea that whatever is concealed is meant to be brought into the open. I think there's a little bit of we ought not have secrets. I think that might be maybe one of the messages out of this, that there really doesn't need to be a part of us that is in the darkness, that we need to just be people of the light as well. Yeah.
Well, the thing I think about with that is the idea that your light's got to be your light no matter where you are, what's going on.
Yeah.
Because, if there's some parts of you that are hidden, you've got to be ready for it to be disclosed. Well, that means our character needs to always be consistent and be ready to be the light that should so they can see it.
And, I think another part to that too is if you go into different situations and as the light, now we kind of put the two together, as the light of the world, if you are that lamp in that sense, if you are the light, you would want it up on a stand so that everybody can, benefit from the light that you have been given and that you have as a Christian. It doesn't make sense to periodically put it under the bed, put it under a bowl, throw it in the closet, close the door, don't let anyone see that light, and kind of hide the light part away. And maybe that is where the evangelical part comes out, is that that's not our role, is to try to hide it away and snuff out the light, because our light is going to expose things that are hidden, whether it's in others or in ourselves. I mean, it could be both outward or inward in this sense. And, whatever is concealed is meant to be brought to light. Things that need to have a light shone upon them, that would be things that this light would accomplish. All right. In addition to that, he goes on and says, I meant to talk about the other part. Let's go back to this one, where he says, with the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and even more. Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, even what they will have will be taken from them. And now he gets into this idea very clearly talking to us, right? That, in this case is that with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. What is this in context with? Any thoughts on this one? This one screams, I would say fairness, being, no favoritism, no cheating the system, no, however you want to look at it. This idea that if you're the one that's in control of the weights and the measures in this situation, whatever measure you use, it's going to turn around and be used on you. Now, this is going to apply itself even more, and we're going to look at another one that's going to follow this same line of thinking. And so let's hold this kind of thought in our mind, and then let's read the next one, because I think we're going to see how this plays in together. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. All right, sounds familiar, right? He's saying it again, but this time it's no longer in this not cheating the system, not, this broad one. He narrows it down into this idea very specifically about judging. And he says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? And I love how he uses the most outlandish idea, that you've really got a full 2x4 sticking out of your eye, and you're like, oh, you got a little piece of dust, let me get that for you. I mean, sometimes we just read this and don't remember the outlandish story he's throwing out at us. And it is as ludicrous as he could come up with a way to be as jarring to them as he could. Let me take the speck out of your eye when all the time there's a plank in your own eye. I always thought, I'm like, well, a plank must be a splinter, or something a little bit bigger, like it's a toothpick size one. No, he's talking about like a ship plank is probably where the mind would have gone. The flooring of the deck of the ship, you got one of those big planks in your eye, and you're concerned about someone else's. Of course, he's talking about judging, and so this kind of starts to clearly see where he's going with this. You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. But remember, what is the very first line of this back in verse 1? Do not judge. Okay, so here on this one. And then he goes on to say, do not give to dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. All right, so there's plenty to talk about on this one, right? Between judging others, having the speck in our eye, and all this. Okay, so going back to that other parable, with the measure you use, it will be used to you and even more. And now it says, don't judge, or what's the measure you use, it'll be used on you. So how does this apply to judging others and just in general? And what I mean by that is, I guess, what do we do about judging others? And maybe the follow-up question is really where we should be going with this. How do we apply this in light of sin in our presence? Because I think these questions are often thought of one and the same, but are they? No, they're not. And that's kind of a critical part of this, yeah.
If we're using the same judgment for ourselves as we do others, the Bible.
Yeah, which in that case, we're not doing the judging, right? And that's the critical part to understand about that. Because, okay, let me, throw out one of those for instance moments, All right, you've got somebody in your presence who is clearly in violation of Scripture. What do you do about it? I mean, really and truly, down to brass tacks at this point. You have somebody who needs to be helped in their path. They've got maybe more than just a speck in their eye. They've got some things in their life that they need to have addressed, and someone needs to bring it up. And you know them, you've got a relationship with them, you feel like you'd be a good person to address it. How do you actually go about it? Because I think we all know if we can help them, we truly help them, right? But how do you go about doing that? What's the right way?
Something that's come out to me in this to talk through, I think part of the message I'm seeing in this is we're all in this together. There is no sin that one person has that you have probably not had in your life at some point. And the degree and the measure we talk about is probably something that is in our terms, not God's terms. And so part of what I wanted to say there was what we've been talking about. I think this reminder that we are in this together as we talk about how we're judging each other and measuring each other. And then in that instance, again, I think, we think back to what we would need in that circumstance. What would we want in that circumstance? And, I think a relationship that you talked about, some compassion, but then also help in moving forward and realizing where the error of our ways is. And, of course, we need to know Scripture for that. But
Right.
I do think you have to bring it up with them, but I think compassion and mercy in a relationship is a big part of that.
So where would step one be? Step one's, first of all, fixing your own life and to an order that you can be an example. I think that's one. And then you're right, building that relationship might be simultaneously that happening so that you will, and maybe you already have that in place, and then you're able to finally address it. Notice there's not a judgment part of that. That's where I think he started this whole thing out with, do not judge. This is not the issue. The problem is, if we were to list them out, and we were to be given a whole grouping of sins, and we're like, all right, put these in order from worst to the most minor. As much as we would like to say that we wouldn't have a ranking order, deep down, is that really true? Because let's be honest, I think we treat people as though there are certain ones that are more egregious than others. And therein lies the problem. Because if the measure we use on certain people for their sins that we deem are the bad ones has to be turned around on our minor ones, right? Because mine's no big deal. Yeah, mine has little slip-ups, yeah. You get the idea, right? There's an understanding that lost is lost, dark is dark. We logically we get it, but it's really hard to apply because our sin in our lives, which often is a plank getting in the way of the way we're operating and the way we can see clearly, is not allowing us to really help somebody remove a speck that needs to be removed. It's going to be a painful part of their existence, and it's interfering with them. It needs to be fixed, but so does your plank, And so we have to understand that we're in this together, and this concept. But it really takes, right off the bat, the first kind of understanding is it really takes us understanding and getting this idea that the way this applies to judging others is it doesn't happen. He was very clear. Do not judge others. Why? Because it's going to get turned around on you, and it's not going to end well for anybody. First of all, if you judge people as harshly as we often have done, and I think if we're honest with ourselves, which we probably should be honest with ourselves, right? That's a good quality to have. We could probably all admit to times that we have passed judgment on other people for sins in their lives, not ever looking at what might be sinful in our own. And I think we could all know that that's not the direction we want to go. Did you have a comment? I saw a hand go up. I don't know.
I was just wondering if you were going to go to 1 Corinthians 5.
I don't have it in there, so go ahead and...
Well, I think it's further complicated by the fact that if we have sin in the body that's affecting other people, we are commanded, in fact, to address that.
Right.
And
And
I think we're uncomfortable with that. We are so much more comfortable pointing our fingers to people outside.
yeah.
And talking about how wicked they are. But Paul says specifically, you leave that to God.
And we put it together with Jesus' words, and we do it in a non-judgmental way, which really complicates it because we're talking to people who should know better, or whatever, we want to label it as. And all of a sudden we have to be careful that the gossip train doesn't leave the station, that, everything else doesn't start happening too, because you get into this situation where you're exactly right. The most difficult ones are the ones that are closer to you, because then there is the relationship at stake at the same time, that, is a relationship you have with this person going to survive what could be perceived as an attack if you do it the wrong way, or just even the gentle nudge and reminder and kind of helping steer them might not sit well with them. And so it is going to be more difficult. But we are commanded to do that. That's why I said that the judging doesn't happen. But how do we apply this to light, in light of sin in our presence? It has to be addressed. I think that we shine our light on the dark world and let our light do the talking. And by that, I mean God's word. Let us be the example, and let God worry about the outside world to a large degree in that sense of how to handle that. In times when people were in, Noah, he was in a horrendous society of people. Lot was living in Sodom and Gomorrah, and that he didn't ask them to fix them. God handled what he needed to handle. But within our number, it does need to be handled, right? It needs to be addressed. It needs to be talked about. And it's uncomfortable, and it's awkward, and you're stepping on toes, and all this kind of stuff. First step is to make sure that you don't need to have a plank removed from your eye, and so that you can clearly see to help somebody. Because, if you think about Jesus telling us the story in this outlandish way, and we have this big blocking in our eye. Oh, let me get that. Let me help you with a really critical little fine tooth, kind of surgical, almost like, removal of a speck from your eye. But I can't see you anyway because I've got all these things in my way, obscuring my own vision, obscuring my outlook. I hope I didn't change anything you said on the tone of that, because I agree. I think that we have to address that. And that's why I wanted to look at this one, because we have to be careful that we don't judge. How do we really, truly separate judging and calling sin what it is? That is a really difficult one. Well, what have we always thrown out there? Love the sin or hate the sin. We've said that one, which is good. But realistically, are we able to do that well enough? Are we able to do that to a point where we really, truly don't tear somebody down in the process of trying to clean them up? I don't know what the word I'm looking for. I don't mean it that way, but you get the idea of helping them and addressing the sin problem they may have. Are we oftentimes making them feel like a sinner rather than a child of God who is tangled up in sin? See the difference there? I think that, are we making them feel worthless in that process, or are we, because that would be a form of judging. And in the same way, would we want to be made to feel that way? And it's tricky. It's a minefield of sorts that we have to figure out how to navigate well, because in doing that, we can bring people into a better saved relationship with Christ, the sin that is a barrier between them can be removed, but it takes surgical efforts to be careful and not to do that. Anyone else have any thoughts on this? Yeah.
I think that the verse in Peter about being ready to give an answer, even if they're not asking it, we have that heart of being ready to give an answer to the one that asks us with gentleness and reverence. So that means we have to have the right gentleness and reverence in us, and then know what the answer is. Oh, well, I think I know that person's doing a sin. I know that's a sin, but I don't
And I think that's where the light comes in. I mean, I think that's why we want to make sure our light constantly shines for that very reason, so that we can influence people in that way. The last line of that parable, though, is almost a completely other one. Do not give to dogs what is sacred. Do not throw pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Okay, well, the Speck part was easy to understand and wrap our mind around, but what qualifies under this? What does giving dogs what is sacred look like? I mean, what would that be? I have one thought that always pops into my head, but before I share that one, we'll see if anyone else has a thought. What does it look like when you give dogs what is sacred?
You know, man, I don't know if this is right or not, but the way that I've kind of interpreted this in my life is that there are times when you can clearly see someone doesn't have the intention of opening up their heart to Christ. And it's no productivity is going to come out of an argument and sharing the gospel at that point in time, because they just want this. It's like a dog, getting ready to attack bone or something or a target. It's like they just want to attack. And there are times that where you just have to learn that that's not a door that's being opened at that point in time to engage with that person.
Yeah, the heart has not yet become fertile soil. Is from another parable. You're right. And I think when I look at this one, the one I come back to all the time is well-intentioned. I think a lot of people really, truly want to use certain online platforms to share a gospel message. And then you look at the comments and you think, wow, got trampled under feet. And they're turning and devouring. And it's for people who can't understand God because they haven't allowed themselves to be in a state where they're searching for him, where they haven't allowed their heart to be softened to the idea that maybe humanism isn't the end-all be-all that the world would say that, and then all of a sudden you throw out some of our core belief to them, maybe at the improper way or improper time. A lot of times it doesn't just fall on deaf ears, it falls on a ravishing dog that's just going to rip it to pieces and make it look worse to those that then hear it. And so it takes what is sacred and it just throws it out, whether it's in a argument, face-to-face situation, whether it's in an online posting argument style or whatever. I think we have to understand the time and the place idea there. And that's a really tough one sometimes for us to do. So why would why would Jesus be using this and this idea also of, giving your pearls to pigs with his disciples, particularly who he's talking to, but also us? Why is this what he thinks we need to hear? Particularly his disciples. Let's go with that because he's talking directly to them. What was it that they needed to understand about that? And what were they about to face in the years to come? Persecution, absolute, just utter disdain for their message, sometimes to the point where they just had to walk out of the town and shake the dust off of their sandals. I mean, there were times that it was just not going to be well received. Some of them are going to be killed over it. Some of them are going to be just, brutally treated because of it. And he basically says, don't give dogs what is sacred. There's a point where don't go about, be smart about how you spread the gospel message. And I don't want us to use that as license then to stop sharing the gospel message. I think our light can shine and we are always going to let our light shine. But when it comes time to really give the sacred word of God to people in that sense, that we need to be maybe more careful about the way we do it. I mean, if we just go throwing Bible pages all over the place, what are the odds that we're going to find one and just hope it sticks, kind of this idea. I don't know that that's highly effective, and I don't know that that's what Jesus is saying either. I think maybe what would be more intentional is rather than, going into a situation where you're going to have it, completely just ripped to shreds and then they turn and go after you, maybe you soften that soil a little bit. You kind of work at that. You build a relationship first. Yeah.
I mean, maybe this is similar to what Cody was saying, but if we also think about this in the context of judging, right? We're given a process. Jesus gives us a process. If someone is caught in
Yeah.
And that's exactly what was happening in 1 Corinthians. You got a sexually immoral person who is not repentant, not willing to, and Paul says, don't even eat with that person. I think the pearls is similar to that. Right?
Yeah.
You don't waste your breath. You've done all of the things to bring them back. They won't do it. The only response, I think, here with what Jesus says and what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, is you got to disfellowship. You got to take this seriously, or else they'll turn and rend you. Right? They do more harm to the church. So the example in 1 Corinthians is a guy sleeping with his mother's or his father's wife.
Right.
Well, if our kids see that, right? Our kids see that, that becomes normal. We accept that in this congregation. Then that affects them. That's, I think, the pigs turning and rending us.
Yeah. Oh, I think you're right. I mean, I don't disagree. It's interesting with so many of these, how many, that wasn't even the direction my mind was going, but I can totally see that as well. I think we've got so many facets to his stories on these. On that one too, I think it's interesting. When you were saying it, my mind was going to some of those early letters that were written in the beginning of Revelation, and you see what did end up happening with some of those churches that let a little bit of a sin take hold within their church, and it just ran rampant on there. I think we, on a lot of these, what is this ultimately coming back to? It's coming back to him wanting us to reach out and teach the world around us, and knowing that there's a point where you've done everything you can do with a person. There's maybe, I want to say a stopping point, but there's a point where, I'll say it this way. I remember years ago when we were doing a transfer semester over in Germany. We were in Austria, but we were in Germany at the time, and we did a little week-long campaign with the church in Bremen, Germany. And I remember being there and thinking that there were a couple that had been there and working, and the church was slow to grow. And after 40-some years, I think they had converted 10 people. And you think, well, that's a really low number. And your first thought was, are they... is this even effective? But then you think, well, there was 10 people, so I mean, they did reach 10. So, you try not to put a number on it or whatever, but at the same time, I think I experienced what they probably ran into a lot. We were out in the area, and we were handing things out, just invitations, simply to kind of come hear the message. And literally, you would have people ripping the paper up and throwing it back at you. It was just very anti-wanting to hear any kind of message. Not even take the paper and throw it away kindly in the next trash can like we would do here. There, they would make sure you knew, I want nothing of this, and they would just kind of toss it right back at you. And so I thought, well, maybe that's another example of this. I think there's layers of this, of how many fall into this category of how many I don't know how to wrap that up exactly, but just each one of these ideas of what it looks like to give your pearls to pigs and your what is sacred to dogs. I don't know that we can come up with one exact situation and say that's exactly what he was talking about, because I think if it was that specific, he would have said it more specifically than that. I think he wants us to use this as a principle to apply, like Rick said, in the situation of applying it to those within the sin within our own number. The same way we apply that idea of not judging, we have to apply that there's a point where we stop throwing that sacred to what's going to eventually turn on us. Whether it's like Cody said, that it's somebody who's angry and has no heart that's there. There may be multiple ways that this gets implemented or kind of shown itself and manifests its way. But for us to understand the idea behind this, we look at this. We have sin in our midst from time to time that needs to be addressed, and it's the loving and right thing to do to address it, right? We do it in a non-judgmental way. We do it in a way that first makes sure that we're not guilty of things that we're going to turn around and tell other people that they shouldn't be doing, or guilty of the same level of things that we're not really going to be of good help with them. And you first always start on all of these by looking inward and saying, what can I do to improve my life, and what can I do to clean up any sin that might be in my life? And I think as soon as you start turning it in that way, the judgment's really hard then to turn around to someone else. Unless you're really truly looking at yourself with rose-colored glasses and like, well, turns out I'm perfect. All right. And then then after that, we go out there and we say, Jenny, I got something I got to bring up here because I'm perfect, so I can now. Like that's the idea. If that's the way we're looking at it, we're going about it the wrong way, right? I think we can all see that. Instead, we need to look at it and say, how can I fix myself? How can I then turn around and help others, not judge? And that's a really critical thing, is how we can bring people back to a saved relationship with Christ is not by judging them. We're not going to judge somebody into salvation. We're going to love them into that. We're going to steer them into, and then there's a point where we've done every single thing we can possibly do, and we just have to cut ties with them because we can't keep throwing what is sacred to those who are just going to turn and devour us. And so where are all those lines? Well, look, we're out of time. All right, it's 11:30. Perfect end point. No, I don't know that we're going to have that answer. Those are judgment calls on every single time. And so with that, we'll kind of wrap things up. Next week, I'm not sure if Jerry, are you also teaching next week? Zach is, okay. All right, so Zach will have our lesson for next week. And then after we're back from Winterfest, we will continue on with our study of parables